Hi, this is Lou, and in this week's video I'm going to be doing some really simple block printing on fabric, and then I'm going to take that fabric that I've printed and turn it into a pencil case. So first of all, I'm going to make my block, and I have these offcuts of craft foam, and that's all I'm going to use, except I need something to stick them to. So I've got these bits that are like bits of mount board that you cut out of the centre when you're mounting a picture, but any kind of like stiff card or even some like hardboard or MDF will work just fine. I've got some glue to stick it on with. Pretty much any glue will work, but you want to make sure that it's really nice and flat. I've got some scissors that I'm going to use to cut up the craft foam and the board, and just a paintbrush to paint my glue on. So I'm looking to make a really simple design. So I think I'm going to cut this into even smaller pieces like this. You can do any shapes you like, and you can make them any size you like really as well. I'm going to do these fairly small, and I'm going to make them into little pluses just by snipping the corners out of these squares. So there, I don't want it to be too neat because I want to emphasise the handmade element of this. So if they're all a little bit off, then that's good. So I think I'm going to make 4 of these, and then I'm going to stick them down onto my mount board. So there we go, I can lay them out and decide like what layout looks best. Do they need a little editing? So I'm going to stick these onto the mount board like this, maybe a little closer. And then I can trim off the rest when it's all stuck down. There we go, and then when you're all happy, we're just going to leave that to dry, and then I'm going to trim off the rest of the mount board. So now this is all dry, and I've trimmed the mount board down to just a few millimetres away from the edge of those little bits of foam that I've cut. And now we're ready to start printing. I've got a piece of fabric here that I'm going to test on. The first couple of prints are usually a bit naff. So I always like to do a couple on a bit of scrap fabric, and this is an old pillowcase that I cut up that was a bit stained. And then underneath I've got some padded fabric. When you're printing onto fabric, it's really good to have a slightly soft base. So a couple of bits of folded fabric or something like that underneath will help you getting a nice even print. And then over here I've got a sheet of glass, and that's what I'm going to use as my palette for rolling out my printing ink onto. But yeah, any kind of smooth non-porous surface will do, so a piece of plastic or something like that will be fine. And then you need some kind of fabric paint, and what I'm using is actually screen printing ink. So I've got this System 3 screen printing medium, which is for textiles, and you just mix it with normal acrylic paint, and it creates an ink that you can print onto fabric, and then you heat set it. And the easiest way to do that is with an iron, and then that means it'll be permanent, and you can wash your fabric and it will stay in. And this is what it looks like when it's mixed together. It's kind of gloopy, and if you put it in an airtight container, you can keep it and use it on a future occasion. So I have a roller that will help me apply that ink evenly onto my block that I've made. But if you don't have a roller, then a sponge would work well, or like a nice wide flat paintbrush. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of ink onto the glass, and then use the roller to roll it out nice and smoothly. And now I can roll my ink onto my block. Try and get a nice, neat, even layer. Pick it up, and then let's give it a first test. So I'm pressing down evenly all over, making sure that each of the corners is well pressed down. And there we go, I think that looks pretty good. Now I want to see how my pattern repeats, so I'm going to ink it up again. And try printing next to this one. So you're likely to get bits of the board covered with some of the ink, and if that's something that bothers you, if you trim it a little bit closer to the design, that will help eliminate that. So all I need to do is to print an area that's going to be at least big enough for two sides of my pencil case that I want to make. Nice. So when you've printed as much fabric as you need, you just need to leave this to dry, and then I'm going to heat set it with the iron, and then I'm going to give these a wash with some soap and water. So in order to make our pencil case, we need the fabric that we've printed, and I've also got some contrasting fabric that I'm going to use for the lining, and I've got a zip. I've got some thread to sew it up, and I'm going to use my sewing machine, but you could sew this by hand if you wanted to. So I've cut 2 pieces of fabric and 2 pieces of the lining, and I've made the length of it the same length as my zip. Now you could use a longer zip if you wanted, and then just cut off any excess. So my zip is 24 centimetres from like the little plastic bits there to there, and then there's a little bit extra at the end, which makes the whole length 26 centimetres. So that's the same length as I've made my fabric. And then I just decided how deep I wanted it to be, and I'm going to make it 15 centimetres deep. So I've actually cut my fabric to be 17 centimetres, so I've got a centimetre on each side for the seam allowance. And I've cut all 4 pieces of fabric to the same size. So now I'm going to make a sandwich with this fabric on one side, the zip in the middle, and then some of the lining fabric on top, like that. The important thing is that the head of the zip here, which is the bit that pulls up and down, is next to the patterned bit of the fabric there. That means that when we sew along here, we can turn the zip over, and then the bit that you open will be next to the printed bit of the fabric. So I've got my zip a little way open, and I'm just going to place it right along the edge there. I'm going to position my lining fabric right along the same edge, and then I'm going to sew along here. I'm just going to use a couple of pins to hold it all in place. And I just need to make sure that the edge of the zip tape lines up exactly with the fabric on both sides. So now I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew along here. I'm going to be really careful where the head of the zip is, and when I get close to it, I'm going to pull the zip back to open it a little more and then continue sewing. And that'll make sure I get a really nice straight line of stitches all the way down. And when it's sewn, this is what it looks like. So we can pull back the lining fabric, and there is our zip attached on one side. What I'm going to do now is push this all back, and I'm going to take it to the iron and iron this really nice and flat. And then what we're going to do is do exactly the same, but on the other side of the zipper tape. So the head of the zip is facing upwards, so we need to take our fabric and turn it over the other way. And then we take our lining fabric and place that on the other side. I'm going to open my zip up a little way, and then again I'm going to pin it, making sure that the edge of the zipper tape and the edge of the fabric are all nicely lined up. And again I'm going to go and sew all the way down this side. So this is what our pencil case looks like now. Both sides have been sewn and they've been pressed, and this is it on the inside. This is going to be the inside with the lining. So we've got one more step to do, and for that what we need to do is make sure that our zip is halfway open, and then we take our fabric and we match it up at the corners there. A pin in it. So the outside fabric is meeting the outside fabric, and the lining fabric is meeting the lining fabric. In the middle, where these two zipper tapes are, we want to make sure that they match exactly. So let's put in a couple of pins around that to keep it all nicely in place. So now we've got a lining on one side and our outer fabric on the other, and we're going to sew all the way around the outside, 1 centimetre in. And I'm going to put 2 pins in the lining here, about 10 centimetres apart. You don't need to measure it. So I'm going to sew from one pin all the way around the outside, 1 centimetre away from the edge the whole way. You want to be really careful around these areas where there's lots of layers in there, because it can get a little bit bumpy. So if you're using a sewing machine, then go slowly over those bits. And I'm going to carry on sewing until I get to this other pin, making sure to leave a gap here. The gap is what we're going to use to turn the whole pencil case through. So now I've sewn all the way around, and I'm going to turn it all the way through, but before I do that I'm just going to clip the corners. I want the corners to be nice and neat when they're turned through. And so I'm just snipping off a little bit that's fairly close to the corner. You don't want to go into your stitching, and be very careful not to cut through it. And you want to go maybe 2 or 3 millimeters away from the edge of the stitching, but that'll give you a nice neat corner. And now we can reach through the gap that we left open here and reach into that pencil case. We want to turn it all the way through. You might find it easier to do that if you can find the zip inside and open it all the way. And then we're going to turn it all through that little hole. So once your corner's nearly through, you can use something that's kind of not very sharp, but has got a little bit of a point on it. So I use these big scissors, but I use them closed, and you can poke that into the corner. And get it to look nice and neat and square. And then you want to use your fingers to poke these corners up as well. And to flatten everything out. So we're nearly done here. There are 2 more things I want to do. Firstly, we've got this hole and I need to fix it up. So you could sew this up by hand. What I'm going to do is just if you get the 2 seams and you get them straight, you can kind of pull it and it sort of closes up. And then let's just put a pin in there. And then I can sew really close to the edge along here. And that seam is going to be inside the pencil case, so nobody's going to see it. So this is what that seam looks like once you've sewn it closed. And it would look even less obvious if I used a colour or thread that matched the lining better. What I want to do is to make sure I give this a really good press. And especially I want to repress the lining away from the zip here so that my zip doesn't get caught in it. And then it'll be all ready to use. So thanks very much for watching today. I really hope you liked this. You can do loads of fun patterns like this. You could do dots or stripes or circles or organic shapes. You could do leaves and flowers, and you could mix up the colours as well. You don't just have to stick with one. There's so much scope with this. I really hope that you give it a go, and if you do, I'd love to see the results. If you are on Instagram, if you post your pictures up there, and you can tag me at Lou Rachel Davis, because I love to see them on there. And I'm also on Facebook as well at Lou Davis Artist and Maker. So if you liked the video today, then please do press the like button, and if you'd like to see more content like this, then do subscribe. I post making, sewing and art videos, and I hope to keep you entertained and give you lots of creative inspiration. So thanks very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!